I will just invite us to go live on YouTube. You can let me know when that happens, please.
We're recording now, Mr. Chairman.
Are we live on YouTube?
We're not. We'll push it out afterwards onto YouTube.
Thank you very much. My name is Councillor Tom Ashton, and I'm chairman of this committee. My vice chairman is Councillor Alison Austin. Before we address the agenda, I would just like to welcome Councillor Kate Chalmers to this committee. I hope you enjoy your time with us. It's an exciting committee, I can assure you, and you'll enjoy every minute of it. As some members are aware, there have been issues in respect of sound quality in this room. For this meeting, the microphones from West Street are being used as this increases the sound quality. However, we are a decision-making committee, and every member must be fully aware of all of the presentation, deliberation and comments that are made in order to vote on an application. If any member is struggling to hear, then please let me know immediately by raising your hand, even if this is during not the presentation. And if there are issues that cannot be resolved, then you cannot vote unless you've actually heard all of what has been said in the meeting in order to make a decision. Can I just confirm that you can hear me okay through the microphone? I think the trick is to talk directly into the microphone and try not to tilt your head, which is very difficult when you're trying to address a room. I think it also, given the acoustics, helps if you speak quietly into the microphone rather than addressing the auditorium. All sets have been cleaned with sterilised wipes ahead of this meeting. And if you do need to refer to the screen, which to turn your head to speak, please hold the microphone in front of you, but we will do our best to persevere. And actually, I think looking around, these are working a lot better than when we tried to use this room for meetings without microphones. Hopefully, it remains to the case. We'll move on to part one of the agenda, which is to receive apologies for absence and notification of substitution. Karen, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have apologies from Councillor David Brown and apologies from Councillor David Evans. No substitute members. Thank you.
Thank you. And two is to sign the minutes of the last meeting held 27th of April. And I would confirm that there have been issues identified in the minutes that you probably received in the post, but I can confirm that these issues have been resolved, and the minutes which are available online and the minutes which I hope we will be able to sign in a moment have been reproofed and those issues addressed. That being the case, are you happy for me to sign the minutes, please? Yes. Thank you. We'll do that in a quiet moment on the agenda. 3 is to receive a declaration of interest in respect of any item on the agenda. I would just confirm at this point that Councillor Brown, in giving his apologies, did tell me around that he had an interest in the one item of business on the agenda today, and given that it is the one item, that's why he gave his apologies. But do we have any further declaration of interest?
Chairman, I could just first of all just confirm for public information, as this will go out on YouTube, that I will confirm that the standing declarations of interest will be recorded in the minutes for this meeting for all members of this committee who are members of Lincolnshire County Council, members of the South East Lincolnshire Joint Strategic Planning Committee, and also representatives of the Internal Drainage Boards. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Watson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to explain that I have called this in along with another councillor in my ward. I have had no contact or discussion with either applicants or objectors, and so have an open mind with this item on the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. And to receive any written questions from members of the public.
We have no questions, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. concludes the preliminary items of the agenda, and we'll move to part 2, receive planning application. And our first item of business is application B210158, which is on page 21 of the agenda, and Mr. Gildersleeve will present the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to reiterate what the Chairman said, if at any point members can't hear me, please let me know. So the application before you this morning is for a proposed horse walker for up to 4 horses, the location being Holly Cottage, Drainside North, Curtin, PE21 PE. The report starts on page 21 of your report, and you will see the maps that are there, and you will see where the representation is identified as being received from on page 20. That is from Spittle Farm. You will see Fuchsia Cottage and Holly Cottage, which are also referenced in the report, and an indication of the location of the proposed horse walker. As we move through, you do have a copy of my presentation before you, so feel free to refer to that if it is easier. The slide on screen now is for locational purposes. It identifies the location of Holly Cottage, identified by the red dot. You will see the location of the proposed horse walker, identified by the cursor on the screen, and also the red box. You will see that there are a number of existing buildings forming that overall site. You'll see the relationship of Drainside North, pointing the cursor here, identified by the blue arrow towards the top of the image, and for wider context, Washdyke Road and Willington Road. The proposal is as set out on page 22 of your report, and moving through. The application has been called in by councillors Welton and Watson due to the planning history associated with the site, and it is considered that there is a need for some transparency in relation to this matter, given that planning history. The application site and the proposal is set out in section 2 of the report. The proposal is for a horse walker. It would allow for the ability for 4 horses to be walked. It would be a circular structure consisting of inner and outer mesh fences, set around a revolving pusher unit, a series of arms that will extend from the central motor unit. The horse walk will have a diameter of approximately 10 metres, and the fences that would surround it would stand approximately 1.7 metres high. It would be unroofed and unlit. The application indicates that it is proposed to be used in connection with the domestic use of the site, and that is very similar to other existing equestrian facilities that are there. The relevant policy context is set out on page 23 of your report, leading to then the representation, the one representation that we've received. You will see as well that we have no other formal objections as set out in the consultation section at point 6. The report then moves on through the main matters of consideration. If I return back to the image that is before you, you will see that the proposed horse walker is at the point of the cursor, that red circle, denoting the approximate location, to be located adjacent to a timber barn that was approved in 2019 at the point of the cursor, and existing stables, identified as stables on the image, and an existing store building. There is also a large area of hard standing. The adjacent field to the north, identified by the point of the cursor, and where it is annotated 3 metre high hawthorn hedge, is an area that is used for equestrianism, for horse keeping, etc. Moving through, these are some examples of the proposed horse walking. So you can see it is a relatively low level structure, fairly utilitarian in its appearance, its form following its function. The idea, as I understand it, is that you can set the speed of the motor and encourage horses to walk around and maintain a steady speed. Within that, the structure itself would limit the ability for the number of horses that can be utilised at any one time within that. Again, this overhead image taken from Google Earth again shows a historic position of how that site is used and the area within which the horse walker would be located. In particular, I highlight the storage containers at the point of the cursor here, which I will show you in another image shortly. and then the area immediately adjacent here, where there are vehicles currently on this image, that is where that barn that was approved in 2019 has been erected. You'll see there's already an existing menage area here. You will also see the residential property, Holly Cottage at the point of the cursor here, and Spittle Farm at the point of the cursor here. As I said in my previous sentence, those are the shipping containers that are in the approximate position of the horse walker. They will be removed to accommodate that structure. And again, looking at that from a different direction, and you can see the field beyond, and also that hawthorn hedge that was referred to on the previous images, which denotes the boundary of the neighbouring property. In terms of the principle of development, it is considered that the principle of development is acceptable in terms of policy 1. The proposals are to be used for domestic purposes only, and officers are recommending a condition to be imposed that reflects that. That is set out on page 27 of your report. In terms of the impact on the character and appearance of the area, officers generally consider that this is a low-key incursion into the countryside. It is in keeping with the equestrian use of the site, and that there will be no impacts in terms of policy 2. And in terms of policies 2 and 3 in relation to neighbouring amenity, the issues raised in the objections have been fully considered, and as set out in your report, officers consider that there are no overriding issues in terms of amenity subject to the conditions as recommended. Finally, in terms of flood risk, you will also see that that matter is considered to be acceptable. Draw your attention to the other matters that are set out at 7.19 to 7.21 of the report. Again, reaffirming that officers have considered the impact of the horse walker in its widest context and considered the representations that have been received in detail. However, the recommendation before you members is one of conditional permission, subject to the conditions as set out on page 27 of your report. I will leave my presentation there, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gillespie. We do have a registered speaker this morning, Mr. Henty. Would you address the meeting, please? You have 5 minutes in which to make your representation. And following that, members may have a few questions for you. A bell will sound when you have 30 seconds remaining, and two bells will sound at the point at which your time is up. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for allowing me to be present today. From the presentation I'd like to put forward, you may feel that this is a very small matter, and I've been intrigued as to why I've attended as well. So I would just like to outline in the time I have the impact that this further development would have on us as immediate neighbours to the property. And as you can see from the surrounding area, we are pretty much the only neighbours that would be affected. But history, unfortunately, and factors with our neighbours kind of led me to want to make sure that there is that transparency that Mike has spoken about, and that my partner's concerns about the impact we will have in our home, in our lives, by the activities of our neighbour, are considered today. So, to touch on the history element that's been brought forward as the previous plan. So there have been some issues with that previous tin farm that was approved. So that relate to the horse walker, they've got conflicting information within the application regarding control of surface water and drainage. They touch on having a soakaway put in the initial application, and then a flood risk assessment to state that the land will act along with the hedge on the boundary, would act as the water absorption and to manage the runoff. Now, the boundary hedge is not a boundary hedge, it is our hedge. It's within our land, and the boundary lines are wire and post fence that is on the other side of it. So they're initially proposing a soakaway, which they haven't been planting for, which I feel is unreasonable, as that is something which I expect an area of 10 metre by 10 metres square concrete base, which again hasn't been put forward as in the plan that is going to exist, will cause surface water runoff, and that will therefore lead into my point without insufficient drainage. To use my hedge in my land as their drainage, I don't feel is acceptable, especially with the timber barns we put in. Unfortunately, in that planning approval, there were no conditions put in for drainage for that barn. So the neighbours then decided to use my land and hedge as the runoff from the downpipes of that very substantial 10 stable timber barn. Unfortunately, through my attempts to get that challenged for enforcement, unfortunately, Alan Watts in enforcement was unable to progress that further due to a lack of conditions within that previous planning application. So today, obviously, I want to make it very clear that we've had substantial impact on our land and financially to deal with the damage that was caused by their actions, which we felt were unreasonable. And we're not unreasonable people, but we don't want to be impacted by what is approved or put forward through matters that we feel we have tried to follow the process of planning from the very beginning. So the matter around the drainage does concern us. I would like you to consider that in your decision making. There is an opportunity for them to utilise the substantial drain that is on the other side of their boundary, which, having discussed with Black Sluice, all they require is consent to having water, surface water in the soakaway. Rather than having to create a soakaway, they can pipe with consent that water to that drain. That would take away an immediate effect on us as neighbours. In terms of the location, now there is a substantial hedge. A horse walker is a large machine which will be regularly in use, and I expect during the day. I think concerns around it being at a time that is unreasonable won't necessarily happen. So it's important that that location is understood from our point of view. We walk and graze our horses in the land immediately next to it, and we do feel that will create large disruption to our day-to-day life and how our horses are living their lives in a countryside location. So it is not being specified how close to the boundary they want it, but there are other locations available.
What's your time, Mr. Henty? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative. I will now invite members of the committee to ask any questions in respect to your representation. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would just like, if possible, if Mike could bring up a shot showing the aerial shot showing Mr. Henty's Spittle Farm in relation to the property of the proposal. Can we just do that or not? Because it will help to understand Mr. Henty's concerns. So my question, if you wanted to put it specifically into questions, then I understand your property is about 75 metres away from the neighbouring property. Is that correct?
Yes, our dwelling is a good distance from the location.
Right, but if you can see that, would be helpful.
It is on the screen before you now, Councillor Noble. So the objector's property is at the point of the cursor here. And this is the approximate location here, identified by the red box. And that is, it is on page 2 of the images before you.
That's clear. Thank you.
Do you have any further questions?
No, thank you, Chair.
Do any other members of the committee? Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Henty, I was just wondering, your neighbour's property, is it actually on higher ground than your property? Thank you.
Yes, the land does lie a bit higher, so that's what compounded the issues previously. And obviously, adding another layer of concrete base would bring it higher still. But yeah, we unfortunately do suffer from being just marginally lower than living are, and obviously had an impact on us previously. Thank you.
And Councillor Robertson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Henty. Could you
explain exactly which is the Black Sluice waterway, the Black Sluice drain, which you think they should be, or they should be discharging their water into, please?
So the other where that reservoir is now, that is a drain that runs down along down the side of their property, which is managed by Black Sluice.
Thank you.
You agree with that view?
Councillor Watson?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, ask Mike Gildersleeves, is it possible for this council to put a condition on this that
I think we can come to that in a moment. Also, once we finish with questions to Mr. Henty. Does anyone else have questions for Mr. Henty? Thank you. I will now open the meeting for committee members to deliberate and determine the application. Please clearly raise your hand. Councillor Watson, you were first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mike heard what I was asking. Is it possible for us as a council to impose a conditional caveat that the drainage be basically sorted out in the way that Mr. Henty has suggested?
In terms of the point, I would take it slightly wider. You will see at condition number 4 on page 27, we are recommending a scheme for the provision of surface water drainage to be submitted to and approved in writing by us. I would suggest that that is a better way of handling it at this stage, as opposed to us dictating at this moment in time which direction that must go. As Mr. Henty alluded to, that drainage solution would require the agreement of the Black Sluice IDB, but there's many other ways that the applicant may choose to deal with it: soak away, drain it somewhere else on their land, etc. So I believe that condition 4 would be sufficient to address the matter of drainage. And again, what I would remind members are obviously when we're talking about drainage, there is the planning matter of drainage, but then there are civil matters associated with drainage, and the drainage and runoff onto somebody else's land, which can become a civil matter between those parties. So I believe that condition 4, as recommended in your report, will be sufficient.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Noble, then Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I think Mr. Henty, you spoke very well in your objections, so thank you for that. I was intrigued by one or two things you said. Well, you said you were the only area affected, but you also said there'd been timber barn issues, but you didn't really go on to explain what they were. The article one was about drainage, but as Mr. Gilson has just alluded to, that's dealt with by condition. So I think very much, with due respect to Mr. Henty, this is a bit of a storm in the stable. Let's go through the specific points. First of all, there's no proposal for any more lighting for this structure. The spatial distances seem to me to be quite adequate. Fuchsia Cottage, 100 metres, your own property, Still Farm, 75 metres, 10 acre, 115 metres, and Woodland, 150 metres. So I think there's no problem with spatial distances. As regards the matter of noise, I understand that the horse walker has kind of a rubber floor to it, which should mitigate the sounds of the horses clip-clopping around it. So I don't think noise is a factor. The surface water drainage we've just dealt with. Horses are herd animals, so I'm pretty that probably your horse might be quite intrigued what was going on by horses in it.
Danny, please address the meeting on the
I'm not specifically talking to Mr. Henty. I refer to him. I'm not talking to him exclusively. I'm talking to the committee. Okay, you're clear on that, Chair?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Okay. The fact that you've got a hedge and it's 3 metres high is wrong. You're a lucky person because of the hedge.
Please direct it not to you or Mr. Henty. Just
okay,
because Mr. Henty is only here as a speaker on his behalf, and it's a little unfair to refer your comments to him.
I'm not, I'm just saying it's his hedge, Chair. It's his hedge, okay? Anyway, the point is, there's a hedge is a beautiful thing, especially a hawthorn hedge, especially in May time when it blossoms, and it's, you see, it's quite hard, it's quite thin, so that should absorb a lot of the noise, and it will also absorb a lot of the water, I think. Just a technical thing, it's referred to in the information as a menage, a household is a manage, but that was spoken before. And so I think that all these entities concerns pretty much are dealt with by condition, which are the noise levels. The fact it's going to be a non-commercial activity taking place there. As Mr. Gilson has said, the issue of surface water drainage is dealt with by condition in point 4. So I fully support this proposal and I will look for the second later on. Thank you, Chair.
You're formally moving it.
I am formally moving it and I was addressing the committee one time, even though I didn't vote to abstain sometimes.
Thank you, Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I disagree with Mr. Gildersleeves because I think we're here as a planning committee to make things run smoothly rather than to have a hiccup further down the line. I think the recommendation form is in place, it sounds good, but the fact that the land adjacent to this particular application is lower. So I think really we need to put the thinking caps on and perhaps address this today. Because if we've got a black sluice drain close by, and we all know how water on higher ground will still drain off on the neighbouring properties, why don't we put a condition in? I understand what you're saying, and I know a civil matter can happen, but it's more confrontation, confusion, and unhappiness, really. So let's make it simple, more simple. If I would agree to support and second Councillor Noble, only if we can add a little bit extra to the condition for the water to go to the Black Sluice drain, which to me makes perfect sense. I'll leave it to you, Mr. Gildersleeves.
Would you like to come?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Stevens, whilst I appreciate the sentiment of what you're suggesting, I come back to my point that there are many different ways that the matter of drainage can be dealt with, particularly on a site like this where there is land available and there are facilities available. I would question whether it is reasonable, and in terms of the test of imposing conditions, whether it is reasonable and necessary for us to be that specific to say it must go into a black sluice maintained drain. Because if they can't get permission from the black sluice to do that, one of two things happens. Either the development doesn't go ahead, or they have to come back in with a variation of condition to seek agreement to go into an alternative provision. And so, to my mind, given the facts I've just said, actually that condition there doesn't rule out them going into a black sluice drain, but it doesn't force them into that situation. What it actually does is require them to come back to us with further details, which we would agree through the discharge of condition process. We would review that information, we would liaise with the relevant technical specialists, which could include the black sluice IDB, and then we would look at that condition on its own merits and the scheme that is proposed on its own merits. I appreciate the concerns and that we're trying to avoid a situation in the future, but I think that condition is perfectly adequate. What I would say is if members felt so strongly about it that they wanted to encourage the applicant to use all reasonable endeavours to engage with Black Sluice to look at that as an alternative solution, then that would be something we could put on as an informative to the application. But that would be the extent of my recommendation to you. Clearly, members, you are quite within your remit to take a different decision to the recommendation I'm putting forward to you. But I would suggest that the condition as worded is perfectly adequate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gill.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm more than happy to second this. I think the conditions are more than adequate. It is a domestic horse walker, and the conditions requiring that the local planning authority shall be satisfied by the work scheme in place actually is more powerful than just dictating one way. So I'm more than happy to second this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Austin, and then Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, dwelling on this matter of water drainage, there's no mention that whether or not you have to get any consent or response by the local flood authority. I don't know whether it's necessary for this type of application. And since it doesn't fall in my division, I didn't obviously receive any notification. Before I go on, then may I just ask Mr. Goldsmith that because this is not sort of a house itself, will the county have responded?
Through yourself, Mr. Chairman, the consultations are set out in section 6 of the report. So we've had no response back from LCC. Even if they weren't directly consulted, they would have seen the weekly list and would have had the opportunity to comment in any way. For something like this, it is not uncommon for the lead local authority to not respond because it is a relatively small-scale issue and it's not in an area where there are known drainage problems, for example, which would invite their sort of comment. So I think that's the best confidence I can give to you, Councillor Austin.
No, go on, Chairman. Thank you. Right. In the absence of any comment from them, I think they clearly aren't perceived as being any major issues because I know that they are extremely hot on any potential problems. I therefore see nothing wrong with the condition that is set out in number 4, that the drainage screen should be submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority. I think that is quite adequate, as I believe Councillor Skinner does. So equally, I would be supporting it from the point of view of that aspect. We can assume this speaker obviously also have horses, but this is a rural situation and horses can react to various things, so I don't see that has any more reason to upset a neighbouring horse that they're tractor or anything else. And I have no issue at all with this application and will be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. I don't have any further. Do I have Councillor Stevens, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the suggestion that Mr. Gildersleeve's put forward, if that could be the suggestion that the applicant investigates the drainage board as a way of getting rid of the water, I would be happy with that if my fellow committee members were also in agreement. But I think that's quite a sensible way to go forward. It's not putting too much pressure on, but it's putting a gentle suggestion as the way we've been thinking. So it avoids hopefully avoids any problems in the future. Thank you.
Would I ask if the mover and seconder would be prepared to accept the informative which Mr. Gildersleeve suggested a few moments ago be included as part of their recommendation?
Important it's very clear for condition 4 that unless the drainage issue is satisfactorily resolved, this also could work in the city.
And Councillor Skinner? Thank you. So that informative which Mr. Gildersleeve explained would be added, not changing the recommendation, but adding an informative to the decision. Thank you. And Councillor Austin, please.
I wouldn't vote negatively as a result of that, but there's various sayings about apple aren't the only fruit and so on, oranges, whichever it is, but there are many, many other possibilities, aren't there, besides this going into a nearby water course. And I think that, to my mind, is quite unnecessary. This is a rural situation, and I really think that it's totally unnecessary, since the mover and the seconder are happy to go along with it, but of course it is only an informative, it carries no weight, does it, whatsoever, and I would certainly think that there are better alternatives. Thank you.
Councillor Bedford.
Thank you, Chairman. Did Blacks lose comment at all? Because I know, they've got a board meeting again tomorrow, and there's always a list of all the applications and everything else that they discuss with you and put their comments in. Did they make any comments or not?
Through yourself, Mr. Chairman, and Councillor Bedford, again, I refer to my answer in reference to the lead local flood authority. The consultation responses that we received are set out in section 6, and we haven't had anything back. I couldn't confirm to you, sadly now, whether or not they were directly consulted, but they would have, again, had access to the weekly list had they wanted to comment. If I may just take the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, just to be clear for all members and Mr. Henty as well. Obviously, the approach with an informative, it doesn't carry any weight. It is there to try and guide the applicants to consider that as an option. But the formal requirement of the condition would require those details to be submitted to and approved by us.
One other thing, could reasonable conditions to put that the design of the walk, and I ask this because my next room's the Northern State, wasn't in London, and they put them in like this in the first instance. And it wasn't many weeks before they decided and then to the roof on it and wanted to put it. So can a condition be put in the fact that if anything varies from this, then they have to come back for an extra planning condition to be filled in, because I can't read anywhere where we have said that it has to be of the design, because it is so easy on these things to come back, put a roof on it very quickly and lighting on it. And I wouldn't like that to happen 2 months down the line, and then we're not able to do anything about it. Thank you.
Through yourself, Mr. Chairman, in response to that point, obviously condition 2 requires the development to be carried out in accordance with the details that we received as part of the application. So that does give us the first bit of comfort, I would hope, and as you all well know, we have to determine what's before us, what may or may not happen in the future to kind of one side. Putting a roof on is likely to require planning permission. It would be development in its own right, so I don't think a condition requiring that would be reasonable or necessary. The lighting one, I would be relaxed about imposing a lighting condition that said no lighting to be installed, just to be really explicit. Yeah, just because again that can take different forms and can sometimes require planning permission, can sometimes not, depending on the scale of it, etc., etc. So again, I would be comfortable with us putting a condition on in relation to requiring that no lighting is installed. And that would then mean that they would need to then come back with a variation to the condition or a standalone application for that lighting. But again, if that was the route, obviously the proposer and seconder and the overall committee need to vote on that point. And if that was a suggestion, then I'd be happy to take that away on the delegation to impose such a condition.
I have a motion second to that put on in June.
Thank you, Captain Dowie.
Yeah, absolutely sound idea. We can go in and ask if you'd like to go to that. I don't think that would seem to carry in there, but let's put it on condition. Let's take on happen. That's absolutely fine.
Quite happy. It does act, it's in the middle of the countryside. We don't want it causing light pollution when it shouldn't be there. Quite happy.
Thank you. I don't have any further speakers. I would go down, but for my own part, I'm satisfied with the recommendations that we have in front of us, that the additional lighting condition and the informative, as we've discussed, are sufficient in my mind to make this development acceptable. I'm very pleased to see it condition 3 on page 27. We have a condition to limit this for domestic purposes only, which to my mind is incredibly important, and I have every confidence that our officers, when discharging the conditions, will do so incredibly carefully in respect of the drainage scheme. So I'm happy, for my part, to support the application. I don't have any other speakers, so I'm happy to move to the vote, and that is on the moving of Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Skinner, that the application be approved with the recommendations as set out, but with an additional informative in respect of the drainage scheme favouring the Black Sluice route for discharge, and also a condition to restrict to prohibit lighting without a separate application, and the wording of that to be delegated to Mr. Gildersleeve to put together. Is that okay, Karen?
That's fine, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So those in favour of the application and those conditions, please show.
That's unanimous, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The second item on today's agenda is the appeals update. Mr. Henty, you are welcome to stay for this item. Alternatively, you're equally welcome to take a leave of us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, can we close one of the windows?
That window, I don't mind that one behind you, but this one, and then I can take this off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the second item on today's agenda is the appeals update, report on page 29, and Mr. Gildersleeve will present this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a very short update since our last meeting on the appeals that have been received. The various decisions are set out on pages 30, 31, 32, 33, 34. You will see that we've had 9 decisions in total, 7 of which were dismissed, 1 of which was allowed, and 1 of which was quashed. That one that was quashed, I'm sure, is an unusual one for members. That related to an enforcement notice that was served at Tall Trees, and that matter is ongoing, and we currently have a live planning application in respect of that site. I won't go through any of the decisions in detail, other than to say that the appeals record is good, and it shows that our performance in certain policy areas is continuing to go particularly well. The 2 notable decisions for me were the Field Street decision, where the inspector supported our position in terms of the amenity space and standard of accommodation that would be resulting from that development. Again, it's the first test that we've had around policy 21 in particular in relation to HMO developments. And also the land north of Millstone, Donington Road, Curtain End, where members will recall that we had a very early decision in my time at this council that was allowed just down the road, where it had been put in off the back of us not having a local plan, not having an up-to-date 5-year land supply, and that was allowed. This decision, not too far away, the inspector upheld the policies of the local plan and recognised that 5-year land supply, so dismissed the appeal. So overall, our performance is well within the national requirements. There is a minor error in the report at 4.1. That's just a hangover from the previous report, but as I say, the references to the 9 decisions we've received is correct elsewhere within the report. And as I say, on page 36, you'll see our national performance, which is well within target. While I've got you, I will just use the opportunity just to give members an update, which is the final slide in the pack before you, just on the work progression within development management over 21-22 in the COVID year that we've had. And what you'll see there is actually comparably, there was very little difference between 19-20 and 20-21. 525 decisions. The substantive amount of those 308 were approved for planning applications. And the majority were dealt with by delegated powers over the course of the year. 55% of applications being for full planning permission. The next 2 on the list were condition discharge and tree works at 6%. So it does go to show the focus of our attention. And we've got 2 statistics there in terms of the number of housing units permitted last year and also the number of completions. The overriding figure there of 142 of which were for affordable. So I believe those are very good statistics all round. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll invite comment from members of the committee. Councillor Noble.
Thank you. Yes, just like to say that it's very pleasing to see that almost a third of the housing for affordable housing. I think that's excellent because that's kind of housing that we're going to send over. It's really good. So I think we're actually happy in the council on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, our housing completions, how are we doing as regards our targets? Because I don't think we've actually got our target down here. But and how do we relate to other authorities? Not that you can compare like, because there's nothing like us to compare with.
Thank you, Councillor Austin, for your queries. In terms of the housing completions, we're 16 shy of where we should have been. Our target is 310 per annum. We've ended up with 294 in the current year, which is very, very good. And we believe that the government will give some allowances as well for the interruptions due to COVID and the fact that they shut sites down for a couple of months throughout last year, so that was very good. In terms of comparing ourselves with others, obviously we're not comparing performance there, we're considering the overall workload, and it is very difficult to compare different departments with the way they, because of the differences in the way they operate. So you're arguably not always comparing apples with apples, but I think what it does show for us in particular is that there is confidence in the system locally, that there is development still happening as we've seen throughout the process. And people are still wanting to invest and do things within the borough.
Thank you. Yes, it is also all reassuring when planning inspectors agree with the decisions that we're taking as a planning authority. I think there's a great deal of confidence to be taken from the Field Street decision, given how sensitive the issue of HMO can be in our town, and that we have policies which are working well. I think generally it is reassuring again that we have a good housing delivery rate, given how important that is to maintaining a 5-year supply. Having some broader experience of local plans, it is pretty good. Selfish think local plan is actually working as well as it is, delivering the housing which it's set out to do, and given the relatively light business loans that we have had recently, suggests to me that it is a plan that is broadly without major areas of contention, and you cannot say that for all local plans. So I think a credit to the work that the planning team have done, and a credit to the work that has gone into self-historic. I don't see any other speakers on this, so Councillor Bedford.
Thank you, Chairman. We used to, on these appeal decisions, actually get a copy of the inspector's reports. Is there any way we can do those because they are very interested, either for or against, and the fact that occasionally little things could come upstairs and you think to yourself, I can use that at some time, for or against. And as I say, we used to get them, but we don't anymore.
Should they share electronically when they come in?
I believe they are, or should be being circulated electronically, but we can certainly look at that as a process. I mean, as the report says, they are all available on the website for those particular applications. And again, they are displayed in the normal way and will sit as the most recent document on the website. So they are available in there for members if you want to have a look at them, but we can certainly look at pushing them out.
Councillor Austin.
Could I suggest that they go, come out with, the reference to them, because that's all we need, the link, as to all the decisions. We get them, we get 3 mailings, don't we, at the weekend, the building control one, but we get the applications received and the applications determined. So they could almost come, I would have thought, in the same mailing as the determined ones.
We're not going to have a huge volume, but I quite like the idea of sharing the appeal petition, as long as it is electronically, we're not printing out loads of paper. But it is an interesting informative on the way that inspectors are going, and I think sometimes you can see obviously patterns depending on who the inspector is and what they've decided before.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, I take the point. I will look at it with the team because obviously our electronic weekly list is generated by the system, so it may or may not be possible, and I don't want to commit to that this time, but if there's another way of dealing with it, we can certainly get them circulated, that's not a problem.
Thank you. Well, I think that concludes that item, and with it, concludes the business of the meeting today. Can we please close the live stream? Our next meeting is scheduled to take place Tuesday the 27th of July, and this time we don't know where that will be taking place, depending of course on the outcome of the Prime Minister's advice. I would thank you all for attending today's session. I thank you all for your perseverance with the technology, particularly those councillors that came into practice with it previously in the room. Well, in my mind, I think the microphones have made a huge difference to the utility of this room. However, while I'll formally close the meeting now, I would have to ask that members remain for 5 minutes so that we can have a chat about the microphones and just how we found them. So I will declare the meeting closed. What do we think, folks?
If you want to